Good afternoon, teachers. Excuse me. I want to take just a couple of seconds to talk about ISTE standards and the Samr model. We're just going to focus on the ISTE standards for students, and we're going to focus on the 2014 standards because those are the ones that I prefer as opposed to the more recent ones, 2016, I think. Nonetheless, if you look at those standards, and I'm just going to look at the broad categories, not all of the subcategories, but what you see in those categories are a couple of things. One of them, you see our 21st century literacies, our 21st century skills: creativity, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, right? And that's also what you're going to see is the standards align with what I'm trying to do in the class, which is to introduce you to tools that support creativity, that support communication, that support collaboration, and of course critical thinking. In addition to that, you see the 21st century literacies under number 3, research and information fluency. That deals with 21st century literacies that we're going to talk about this week. Also, you see, and there's the critical thinking that I was talking about. Also, and that touches on conducting research, which connects, excuse me, to 21st century literacies. But also you see digital citizenship, which we are also going to touch on this weekend. So hopefully what you're seeing, if you look closely at those standards, is you're going to see those standards reflected, and it's in the syllabus, but just to drive the point home, you're going to see those standards reflected in the work that we're doing in the course, that the course is aligned with the teacher and student standards for ISTE. Okay. So, Samr model, developed by a professor from Harvard named Ruben Puttendura, and the Samr model is much more accessible to teachers than the TPAC because you don't have to have such a depth of understanding as it relates to pedagogy and content knowledge. So, and of course this is a PowerPoint I normally use in the classroom, and we actually do an activity with this. But so the model is like a ladder, as you know, because you've read about it and you've watched the videos, but I just want to go over it, just drive the point home again. So that ladder starts off at a very basic low level of integration, and Ertmer and Otterben and Lefwich touch on this. Okay, that a lot of teachers, what they do is that well, Cuban initially was the researcher that said that teachers tend to use technology to support their pre-existing practices. In other words, you get a smart board in the room, and all they use it for is kind of a glorified whiteboard. Okay, Peggy Ertmer, you're going to read an article by her this week. She's up at Purdue University, and a colleague that she does a lot of research with, Otterben and Lefwich. What they talk about is a lack of self-efficacy and the use of technology to a large extent at very low levels of integration. And so that would be substitution. And that doesn't mean anything is wrong with substitution. It just means that there's a place and a time for substitution. Just like there's a place and a time not to use technology in your class. But that is a low level of integration. And that moves up to augmentation, modification, and redefinition. Okay, what Puttendura envisions is this sort of line between augmentation and modification, which sort of transforms the integration of the technology and the degree to which it's been integrated. But also what Puttendura would have us believe is that that his model is like Bloom's, not in the sense that it aligns point for point with Bloom's. Obviously, there are more categories with Bloom's criteria, but that as we move from the lower levels to the higher levels, we have lower levels to higher levels of integration, just like we do with Bloom's, right? So we go from remembering, which is a low level target, to create, which is a much higher level of targeting understanding, right? So that line, as we say, indicates a shift from technology being used to just enhance to technology being used to transform. And usually, again, in class, what I do is would have you look at a couple of different technologies, and then I do a demonstration with it, with the technology that really embodies that whole transformation, and redefines the use of technology to redefine the task. So again, just kind of touching on what Durr would have us believe about Bloom's, okay, is that, again, that the substitution is a low level, like remembering, and then as we move up, redefinition is a higher level, like evaluating and creating. Just to draw your attention that the graphic was taken from Kathy Schrock, and she's someone that you probably want to follow and bookmark on your computer. She's an educational technologist and a very popular one. So when we talk about substitution, as you know from your readings, when we substitute technology, essentially what we're doing is, instead of having a student write a paper, we're just going to have them word process a paper. So there's no real functional change, no increase in engagement, just exchanging one for another. Augmentation, we still are substituting, and that's what we, each one of these build on the other. It doesn't, redefinition still is, there's still something being substituted for, or for modification, something still being augmented. Okay, we're always replacing something when we're integrating technology, right? So, but with the augmentation, what we have is some functional change. So we may have substituted word processing for writing the paper, but it augments that process, because now students can spell check, they can copy and paste. It's easy for them to save multiple drafts, or to just do a number of different functions in word processing, right? Okay, next is modification. And this is where the technology allows for some significant task reduction. So if we substitute Google Docs, okay, now what we can do is we can have a collaborative real-time document where students can be working on it simultaneously. And this, a perfect example of this is, think about now when we're doing NTI and in the online distant format, it would be impossible, because you're thinking, oh, well, if they were writing the paper, well, they could sit right next to each other and they could collaborate. Well, if they're in two different neighborhoods, in the distance learning, that's not possible unless you're using a Google document, okay? And then next is redefinition. Technology allows for the creation of an entirely new task that was previously inconceivable. An example of that may be, instead of writing a paper, we ask our students to turn their paper into a digital story with audio and video and music and sharing and so forth. I used to teach digital stories in here, and teachers still use them. Teachers love them. If we were to all get on a plane and head out to California for the ISTE conference this winter, there would be numerous presentations on digital stories. And what that essentially is taking your paper and turning it into a little mini movie, or like a little Tim Burns documentary. Did I get that right? Tim Burns? The guy who did the Civil War documentary. So, and they're very easy to make. There's software out there called PhotoStory 3 that you can use to make digital stories. And it's just a way to engage students in a higher level of learning through the integration of technology. Another example of that would be Flipgrid, and we'll use Flipgrid later in the semester. Okay, but that redefines it. We couldn't have done that before without digital tools. Okay, so that's all I've got on Samr. If you've got any questions about it, don't hesitate to contact me.